Hello. Welcome to this lecture entitled Citation Elements, Chicago Turabian Style Sheet. You've encountered a number of style sheets already. APA and MLA come to mind. But historians tend to use the Chicago Manual of Style, CMOS, also called Turabian, for the woman pictured here, Kate L. Turabian, who was the secretary of the University of Chicago Graduate School for almost 30 years in the mid-20th century. She created the style sheet, really guidelines, rules, for how to format the tricky parts of master's theses and doctoral dissertations. Her style sheet then became the one the University of Chicago Press used for books, and other academic users, particularly in history, followed suit. Turabian's Manual of Style covers all sorts of formatting things, from capitalization and comma use to when and how to use numbers correctly in your manuscript. You should follow her guidelines in all those areas when you encounter them. But what this videocast covers is how to construct footnotes and bibliographic citations according to Kate's guidelines. First, let's distinguish between the two basic citation styles: the in-text citation style that requires a reference list, aka works cited, and the notes style that includes an alphabetized bibliography as a courtesy to the reader. You probably call the in-text reference list style either APA or MLA, as those style sheets allow only such citations. Chicago Turabian allows in-text, but hold tight. The generic title, in-text reference list, indicates that you make a reference by inserting a truncated parenthetical citation of a source in your text, using the author's last name and usually a date or a page. This makes little sense unless you also add the full citation in a works cited page at the end of your paper. This works cited page looks very much like a bibliography, but it performs a very different function. It is the only place in the paper where you've cited your sources fully. Why does this style exist? In part because it is so much easier for typewriters to insert in-text citations and a works cited list than to insert a superscript number and a full note. Word processing has changed this, and footnotes can be automatically formatted now. So let's look at the notes bibliography style, often called Chicago or Turabian. In it, you insert a citation number at the end of a sentence or a paragraph, which leads to a note that contains the source citation at the bottom, also known as the foot, of the page. A footnote can contain a number of source citations, but remember two things. Any time you cite a source for the first time in your paper, make it a first full citation, not a shortened subsequent citation. Also, when inserting multiple citations into a single footnote, separate each with a semicolon. Footnote citations are self-contained. A short paper doesn't really need a bibliography, but yours does because this is a methods class. A bibliography is an alphabetized list of all the sources you used in your paper. It is a courtesy to readers who want to understand at a glance the extent and kinds of sources you used. History does not use the in-text reference list style. History does use the notes bibliography style. We'll look now at the most common types of citations you will encounter: books, journal articles, newspapers, magazines, websites, manuscripts. We'll also talk about the differences between footnote citations and bibliographic citations. Here's a word of advice from Turabian. Punctuate note citations like sentences and treat note citation elements like clauses. Here's a list of elements for a first full citation of a book. After completing the first citation of any source, you should use an appropriate subsequent citation anytime you mention that same source, We'll discuss subsequent citations in a separate lecture. Use the insert footnote function of your word processor. It will embed a superscript number at the end of the sentence or paragraph to which your footnote citations will refer, and it will automatically insert the footnote number at the bottom of the page. Because this is a class in basic procedures, I require you to key in your footnote and bibliographic citations. There are programs that will do this for you, but do you really want your grade in the hands of a programmer who doesn't care? Yeah, I thought not. So type in the name of the book's author in direct order, followed by a comma. Type in the book's title and subtitle in italics and capitalize correctly, followed by a comma only if there is information other than publication data, such as the names of authors, the number of any edition other than the first, or the name of the series if the book is part of one. Do not follow this information with a comma. Next comes publication information. In a note citation, include that information in parentheses. Inside, type the city, the publishing house name, and the publication date. Separate that information from the page numbers with a comma. Then insert the number of the page or pages from where you retrieve the information you are citing, followed by a period. Do not use P or PP to designate pages. The numbers alone do that. If you need to insert more than one source citation into a footnote, when you insert a footnote at the end of a paragraph that contains info from more than one source, for example, separate each source citation with a semicolon after that page number instead of a period. Insert a period at the very end of the entire footnote, regardless of how many citations it contains. If you use a digital book, add digital identification information. We'll talk about how to do this when we talk about journal article citations. Let's look at a simple example with the elements highlighted. You see in this example that the footnote contains one citation and that its first line is indented. When your word processing program inserts a footnote, it will indent slightly. Don't mess with that, just let it be. Also, let your citation, as you should do with all text, break naturally at the end of the line. Do not force it by tabbing, spacing, or hitting the enter key. You see the elements here. In red is the superscript footnote number. Each footnote has a unique number. Numbers refer to footnotes, not sources. So use each number only once, and you should use only one footnote number at a time. Don't insert two footnotes into a text immediately adjacent to one another. In blue is the author's name in direct order, comma. In green is the book's title, italicized and followed by a comma, because this citation refers to the 9th edition. The edition number is in dark red. Note that the TH in 9th is not in superscript. Microsoft Word autocorrects, so you'll have to undo the superscript. Note, too, that we use the abbreviation for edition, which is why there is a period at the end. In brown is the publication information, opening with a parenthesis, then the city, colon, publisher, comma, and date, close parenthesis, followed by a comma. Last in dark olive is the page number for the specific information to which footnote 10 refers in the text, and the entire footnote is closed with a period. The next common type of source is an article from an academic journal. These are not magazines and newspapers, and you can find them on college library shelves or in databases provided by Troy University Library. Legitimate journal articles are about 15 to 20 pages long and make a sustained argument. Some are shorter, but it's up to you to use legitimate articles rather than book reviews and introductions to special editions. If you're not sure, ask me via email and be sure to include a URL. The elements for all articles, hard copy or digital, are pretty much the same. Superscript foot number, author's name in direct order, comma, title of the article in regular type enclosed in quotation marks, comma, inside the last quotation mark, title of the journal, italicized like a book title, no comma, volume number alone and in Arabic numerals, not Roman, comma, issue number preceded by NO period, no comma, publication date enclosed in parentheses. This includes the season or month and year. JSTOR provides only the year, but JSTOR does not use Turabian, so you must track down the publication season or month like spring or March and add it to the date JSTOR provides, following the publication date with a colon. Then add page numbers from where you took the information in your text. End the completed footnote with a period. If you have retrieved the article from a digital source like a database, include location information by doing this. Use a comma rather than a period after the page number. Use the URL if it's short and stable, like that from JSTOR or a DOI link. Or use the name of the database if the URL is long, as it tends to be in EBSCO host databases or Google Books. Here we see an example with the various elements in different colored boxes. The note number is in bright red. Author's name is in purple, followed by a comma. Article title in light blue. You can see it breaks across the line, enclosed in quotation marks with a comma inside the close quote. Journal article in bright green, italicized, not followed by a comma. Volume, comma, issue number, and date in brown, followed by a colon. Page number in olive green, because I cited the JSTOR version, followed by a comma with the URL in fuchsia. I copy and pasted this from the JSTOR page. A period closes the footnote. Newspapers and magazines make good quasi-primary resources, though you should not use popular magazines in place of more scholarly secondary sources, and be careful about relying heavily on newspapers and magazines unless your research is on how newspapers and magazines reported a story. Here are the elements, some of which you might not be able to find. Author's name, if available. If not, start with the article title, encased in quotation marks, with a comma inside the closed quote. Title of the periodical, italicized. Add the state in parentheses if the city of publication is obscure for a newspaper. Follow this by a comma. Publication date is the month, day, and year for newspapers, and the month and year alone for magazines. Sometimes periodicals will have a volume and issue number, but you can generally leave these off. What about page numbers? For a magazine, use them. For a newspaper, you can leave them off. If a newspaper is large, use the section and page number together. See the example of the citation that I once used. Websites have existed for a mere 2 decades, which might seem like forever to you, but which is no time at all for style sheet creators. Because of the low barrier to entry on the web, it's a bit of the Wild West there. Identification beyond the URL for websites is not standardized, and the best practices are still emerging. Turabian advises to gather and include as much information as you can in this order. Any identification of the content creator, if known. Often that's a group rather than an individual, as in the example. Follow this by a comma. Website title is next, enclosed in quotation marks with a comma inside the closed quote. The title of the website, if it's more than a single page, or the name of the owner of the site itself. Do not italicize this and follow it by a comma. After the comma, insert either the date of the last update or the date you accessed the site so that someone chasing it will know which version you used. It's also okay to insert both if there's any real span of time between them. Open either with the word update or accessed as appropriate. Then insert the full date followed by a comma. Finally, add the URL followed by a period. Remember, if you get the URL wrong by retyping it and by making a typo, you'll create a problem. Copy and paste the URL. That's not plagiarism. Observe this example. The content author is the Kiel Center for Labor Documentation and Archives, Cornell University, and Unite. That last one is a labor union, and the exclamation point is in its name, so follow with a comma. You'll see the title of the page, followed by the title of the entire site. Next is the date I access this URL, and the URL itself. Well, as tricky as websites are, manuscripts like letters and diaries, especially if they live in an archives but are not published, are even trickier to cite because there's so many different kinds. So use good judgment. Because manuscripts are so varied, Turabian recommends a general pattern rather than guidelines or rules. I recommend that you read section 17.7.4 if you use any unpublished manuscript, which I hope you will do. Generally then, begin with the author's name. In the case of a letter, begin with who wrote it, followed by who received it, as in Winston Smith to Emmanuel Goldstein, April 4, 1984. Follow this with a comma, then by the type of document if it's not obvious from the first element, comma. Date of the document if not revealed before, comma. Name of the collection, comma. Name of the repository, comma. Then the city and state of the repository. Close the footnote with a period. It is usually best to not include box and file numbers, as archivists sometimes change these as they reprocess or rehouse collections. Remember, the point of a citation is to take another researcher to the place where you got your information. Sometimes getting them there is a bit messy. If you get stuck, ask the staff at the repository or talk to me. A bibliography is an alphabetical list of the sources you used in your research so other researchers can quickly scan your sources. In a short paper, your reader is usually able to remember all of the sources you used just by looking at your footnotes, but in a longer work, a bibliography is necessary. Because a bibliography performs a different function than footnotes, you format bibliographic citations differently than note citations. Remember, the bibliography is an alphabetical list, so you reverse the author's name order. If there is more than one author, reverse only the first author's name. If the author is an organization, leave the name order as is and use it as is. Do not treat bibliographic entries like sentences, and do not treat elements like clauses. End each element with a period rather than a comma, unless Turabian instructs otherwise. Here are some things to remember. Use a hanging indentation for bibliographic citations, but do not force line breaks or use hard returns. Let the word processor insert hanging indents. Bibliographic citations are single-spaced with a double space between them. When alphabetizing a title without an author, do not alphabetize using a, an, or the, but by the first major word in the title. Page numbers. You are citing your general sources, not the particular page you used. So the only bibliographic entries with page numbers are chapters in books or journal articles. Even then, include the beginning page and the end page, called inclusive pages, to identify the chapter or article in its entirety. Also, Turabian advises that you do not have to cite certain sources in your bibliography, but for this class, you should include everything in your bibliography that you cite in your footnotes, but by the same token, do not include anything there that you did not cite in your footnotes. Let's compare a footnote citation with a bibliographic citation. Compare these entries. You see the footnote entries begin with their number and are formatted like sentences, with specific page numbers at their ends. In the comparable bibliographic entries, the author's names take the place of the citation number, so the author's names are reversed. Also, every element ends with a period, and no page numbers are included. Ponder these and look at Turabian, chapters 15, 16, and 17 for further instructions and examples. If this seems complicated, don't get bent out of shape. Very few people remember all of the details of citation formatting, and no one expects you to. I usually do my own work or check yours with Turabian open on my desk. But this does not absolve you from getting these details correct. Turabian is as available to you as it is to me. So step up to the plate. This then ends the lecture. As always, thank you for your attention.